World leaders will continue their meetings in Switzerland in the coming hours at the Ukraine Peace Summit. Late on Saturday night local time, a draft communiqué was issued. It reaffirmed the territorial integrity of Ukraine and stated unambiguously that any threat or use of nuclear weapons against it was inadmissible. It warned that food security must not be weaponized in any way. The draft also called for a complete exchange of prisoners of war and for the return of displaced Ukrainian children and civilians. More than 90 heads of state and governments are attending. It makes it the largest world leader gathering solely focused on Ukraine since the invasion began more than 2 years ago. But Russia has not been invited and China is not attending. Sarah Rainsford filed this report from day one at Borgenstock.
Shattering the peace of a Swiss mountainside for the cause of peace in Ukraine. Vladimir Zelensky came to meet delegations from all over the world, coming together here to begin seeking out a path towards ending the war waged by Russia. Talking peace is new territory for Kiev, but now it's seizing the initiative, hoping for a broad global alliance that can help push for a settlement on Ukraine's terms.
101 states and international organizations are now at the summit, and this is a tremendous success, our success, the common success of all those who believe that a united world, United Nations are stronger than any aggressor.
Russia wasn't at the summit because Ukraine believes scenes like this show Vladimir Putin's not interested in peace, just destruction and domination. Only this week he called on Kyiv to capitulate if it wants a ceasefire.
Do you think that the West has been too scared of Vladimir Putin to actually help Ukraine defeat him?
Well, I'm pleased that the UK has played a leading role in providing support to Ukraine, the first country to provide lethal aid. More recently, under my leadership, the first country to provide main battle tanks, long-range weapons, to train Air Force pilots. That demonstrates the strength of support for Ukraine.
Ukraine's close allies will have to go on doing all that, even as they support the stirrings of a peace process that would have to involve Russia too at some point.
We are looking for the possibility, if this joint plan will be ready, it will be possible to invite a representative of Russia and represent this plan. But this is a very important. Together with all countries, maybe just more, and it will be open dialogue.
The Gulf is huge. The chances of bridging it seem so remote. But far from the devastation in Ukraine, perhaps there is a faint glimmer of hope. Sarah Rainsford, BBC News, Lake Lucerne.
Well, let's speak to Paul Donaire, who's a professor of political science at the University of California, Riverside. Thank you very much for being with us. What do you think this summit can achieve?
Well, it's not a peace negotiation because, of course, the other combatant isn't represented. But it's important in that a very significant number of countries has gotten together to reaffirm what has essentially been Ukraine's position on a peace negotiation for quite some time, which is that peace has to include, Ukraine's territorial integrity. And so that's a pretty important marker to be putting down at this point in the war.
You mentioned the absence of Russia. What about the absence of China? How much does that make a difference?
Well, I think it's symbolic of the extent to which China is choosing to take Russia's side in the war. I don't think it's especially surprising. This is really a gathering of countries that support Ukraine, or at least willing to think about supporting Ukraine. And so China clearly is supporting Russia in this war, and so they're not going to be there.
And the measures that they've announced so far, how easy would they be to enforce, some of the things they've come up with?
Well, these are statements, these are goals, right? Things like not using food as a weapon of war, not using nuclear threats. The Russians have been using food or food insecurity as a weapon of war, and they have, and I think they will continue to use nuclear threats, not only in some of these statements they're making about nuclear weapons, but in the fact that they are controlling this nuclear power station in Zaporizhia that's really in a very hazardous condition. So these are statements of intent, but they're not statements of things that are necessarily easy to achieve.
Now, this comes as a backdrop of elections coming up in the US, the UK, France. How important are those as part of this geopolitical kind of mix here?
I think these are very important because the sides, if we just take Ukraine and Russia, they're still very far apart. And I think part of what Russia is waiting to see is how long the West and Ukraine's allies will continue to back it. Whereas the West and Ukraine's allies are trying to see how long Russia can and will keep on getting as many of its people killed as it's getting. One big part of that, of course, is who's in power in these countries. And I think Russia hopes that elections will put some people in power who will be more amenable to resolving the war on terms favorable to Russia.
And how much do you think what was set out at the G7 summit, the US-Ukraine bilateral deal, if you like, how much will that cement in equipment and so on coming to Ukraine and perhaps mitigate the effects of an election change?
Yeah, this is a really important point because I think there's a lot of fear that if Donald Trump wins this election, that he will cut aid to Ukraine. I'm actually less certain about that than a lot of people are. But what this agreement is doing in a way is trying to make it harder for another administration in the United States to walk away from Ukraine, because terminating this agreement would be seen as capitulating to Russia. And so it's a lot of what's going on in this war now, and the background to any negotiations that could take place is both sides trying to convince the other of their willingness to stick with it for a long time and endure a very high cost. And that 10-year commitment is a very important commitment in that respect.
Paul Donaire, thank you very much indeed for your analysis. Thank you.
You're welcome.